Hello students, this is Professor McDermott with your video introduction to Module 5. I'm sorry this is a little late, but I had to grade exams for 7 classes last week and I fell a little bit behind, so thank you for your patience. Important information about Module 5. The deadline for your initial posts, if you want to have a chance at full credit, will be Thursday, October 6th at 11:59 p.m. And the chairs for Module 5 will be Elisha Cox for Group 1, Lauren Joyner for Group 2, and Ramona Thielen for Group 3. Chairs, if you're not sure what the Office of Chair entails, please shoot me an email. I'll be happy to clear that up. Now for the recap of your Module 4 discussions on Gilded Age reform. Group 1 had an excerpt from Jane Addams's autobiography, 20 Years at Hull House. I asked them what programs that Addams tried at Hull House were successful and which ones were failures. And Olivia, I liked your post. Jane Addams was most successful in her attempt to create a safer and more attractive setting for social gatherings and events. The Hull House coffee shop became a convenient and suitable setting which businessmen and teachers frequently took advantage of. Although a change of scenery was much needed, better food was also needed, and thanks to the Hull House was provided. Immigrants and locals received nutritious meals consecutively throughout the day. However, I'll just pause and say that even in this successful experiment of the coffee shop, Addams got some pushback from her immigrant clients because she was trying to feed them what she thought was nutritious food, basically what a middle-class American of the time thought was nutritious food, meat and potatoes. And she also didn't like serving alcohol, being a temperance person herself, and so there was no alcohol at the saloon, which caused at the coffee shop, which caused some controversy. So going back to Olivia's post, although many people would prefer to, quote, eat what they'd rather, end quote. This was a quote from one of the clients who said, "Thank you very much for your nutritious food, Jane Addams, but I'd rather eat what I'd rather." Because people were very set in their ways. Obviously, they came from very traditional cultures, and they had their own ways of living and their own ways of eating and cooking. And they didn't want to change overnight. And that made itself felt in a much more poignant and kind of tragic way with the issue of quote-unquote fallen girls. These were young women who had either been forced or had fallen into prostitution. And Jane Addams and her helpers at Hull House were trying to reintegrate these young women back into their communities, but this was really a hard sell because for these very traditional European cultures, once someone had gotten involved with prostitution, in a sense they had become dead to their families, dead to their community. They were considered to be completely on the outside. And they were shunned. They were shunned. And there's some very sad and tragic stories about Addams's failed efforts to help these girls. And so you see that Addams was representing a very progressive, kind of optimistic vision of human nature. She really thought people were capable of reform if their environment could be reformed. Sometimes she was successful. Sometimes she met with resistance from the people that she was serving. But Group 1, you seem to have conceived a very great admiration for Jane Addams and all of her attempts to help people in spite of the difficult odds. Groups 2 and 3, you both had chapters from Jacob Riis's really important book, How the Other Half Lives. Group 2, I asked you to explain some of the problems in the slum environment and some of the criminal behavior that was taking place there. I want to quote a post by Lauren Joyner. She said, one factor in the environment that made people's lives worse was the fact that the gangs would frequently roam the streets around New York, making it unsafe. Riis mentioned that one innocent guy was murdered, leaving his parents behind. And as Ayante pointed out in the answer that she posted as chair to question 2, there were a great many murders and robberies, many of them committed by gangs in cold blood, some of them just for fun. Some very shocking moments in this reading that Group 2 had. Lauren goes on, another factor that made people's lives worse was the low wages for women. It was impossible for a woman to live off the wages given without depriving herself of important necessities. There was a woman who committed suicide due to the harsh conditions in which they were forced to live. In her death note, she wrote, quote, weakness, sleeplessness, and yet obliged to work. My strength fails me. Sing at my coffin. Where does the soul find home and rest? End quote. So, very touching about these women's predicament. Group 3, in your document, you pointed out correctly the overcrowding, the exposure to weather, and the poor clothing, the bad smells in the slum areas, all of this helping to contribute to sickness and disease. But in your question about criminal behavior, you focused on one very crucial issue. In the answer that Ariel posted for the group here, quote, the crimes committed in the slums were mainly involving babies. Baby farming was a big crime that many people did for cash. So if you had a child, an unwanted child, lots of times the parents would simply pawn them off to a baby farmer who was supposedly taking care of them, but really was abusing them, treating them very badly, and starving them to death, sometimes even killing them. The babies were left to die from starvation until they died and their death was written off. Abandonment of babies is a crime, but babies were left in the slums every day. Babies were left outside churches, houses, and streets. Some mothers tried to kill their babies, but some just couldn't take care of them. So it's interesting here. You know, I think this whole book of Reese's raises an interesting question. He seems to be very compassionate and sympathetic to the poor in some ways, but at other times he seems to be really motivated by a certain fear or disgust at the living conditions of the poor. And so I asked both groups 2 and 3 which they thought was uppermost. Was he chiefly dominated by the compassion or by the disgust and fear that a white middle-class person would feel at the time, or according to the living conditions in these slums? Group 2, you had a very lively discussion on this, and I liked the way that even though you had two sides, both sides arguing different points of view, you discussed it and you were able to get to a compromise, which was stated by Rhonda, quote, Reese truly cares for the poor people, and he exhibits this sympathy by writing and revealing so blatantly his disgust of the criminals and the deplorable living conditions their acts have created on poor, innocent people living in the slums. End quote. Group 3 also had a difference of opinion on this issue. Robin, I thought you made a very good point that even though Reese's writing suggests a lot of disgust that he feels, he was also capable of noticing human qualities of the poor people. For example, he mentioned, in her words, quote, a situation where young ragamuffins took the time to gather flowers in honor of a lady that had passed. He knew that even though the children were rough out of necessity, they still possessed the ability to feel compassion and see the beauty of life, end quote. All right, well, I think the discussions were better this time. One thing that hurt people, don't forget about the deadline for the initial post, Thursday, October 6th. A lot of people suffered in their grades unnecessarily because of this. So please get those initial posts up by October the 6th, and then participate fully in the discussions on the focus thread to get that full 25 grade. There aren't any extra assignments during Module 5, but don't forget that your second stage of the writing assignment will be due at the end of Module 6, so you do very well to get a head start on that. And to that end, I've posted a folder in Module 5 called Videos on MLA Formatting. These are short videos to help you refresh your memory if you've forgotten some of the details of MLA formatting. So as needed, please take a look at those videos. The topics for Module 5 are Jim Crow laws, that is, the laws that took away the vote from black males and instituted segregation and discrimination throughout the South during the 1890s, and the progressive movement that really came into its own during the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt. Also, you're going to have a short silent movie So don't be alarmed if you don't hear any dialogue. You won't. You'll just hear music and you'll see the titles on the screen. This short movie is by one of the first important female film directors. Her name was Alice Guy Blaché. It's called Making an American Citizen, and she takes on the issue of immigrants, specifically the way that immigrants have to learn to treat women if they're going to become good American citizens. So all your questions, actually every group has the same material and the same questions. The video and also your documents are the same, by Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And this will bring us into the debate among African American leaders about how blacks should have responded to segregation and Jim Crow in the 1890s. So I hope you'll give this very crucial debate in American history the careful thought and attention that it really does deserve. And as always, feel free to contact me if you have any issues, questions, or anything that you just want to talk about related to history or this course. Thanks, and good luck with Module 5.